More Necron stuff! Yeah, we're making these summoning cores, and that's coming right up. Welcome back, and it's great to have you here. So, today we're making not one, but two pieces of terrain for our Necron-themed tables. So, we're making the summoning cores from Dawn of War, and they look freaking awesome in that game, so we're going to try to replicate them as well as we can on the tabletop. But before we get into that, if this is your first time here, here's what's up. If you want to improve your wargaming, make your tabletop battles more epic, and give your wargaming budget more power, then be sure to smash the subscribe button below and ding the bell. That way you won't miss anything. Now, let's check out what we're going to need to make this terrain. So, here's what we're going to need to make these summoning cores. We're going to need some 30mm thick foam, we're going to need paints, we're going to need PVA glue and watered down PVA glue in a spray bottle. We're going to need some 600 grit sandpaper, we're going to need knives, paintbrushes, acrylic gap filler, and a ruler to measure stuff with. So, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to mark out the rough shapes of our bits of foam. So, given that this is 30mm thick, for the greater summoning core it's kind of square and the standard one's more rectangular as far as the base shape. So, for the greater summoning core we're going to have two pieces, and for the standard summoning core we're going to have just one piece of this 30mm thick foam. Given that we're going to be putting two bits of 30mm thick foam against each other for the greater summoning core, that means we're going to have 60mm. So we're going to make our, well, width, I suppose, will be 60mm. So we're just going to take our ruler and we're going to mark out the 60mm mark at several points from a common edge. And then we line all of our points up and score along it. And then going from the common edge again, we're going to mark 120 so that we have our two bits that are 60. And now we're just going to cut those out. Remember, when you're cutting out foam, it's best to make lots of shallow cuts, pulling the blade along it rather than trying to drag the blade through it, because that will just tear it. And now we have two bits of foam that join together quite nicely. And of course, we need another one of these for our standard summoning core. So, we probably should have done this before we cut them into three separate pieces, but oh well. Now we want to make them about, I'd say 100mm high is what we can get away with. So just like before, we're going to set the ruler down on a common point, and then mark some 100mm marks into them. Like so. And now, with them all lined up at the base nicely, we're going to get our ruler and we're going to line up our, 6 marks here with the ruler, like so, hold it down, and then score a line straight across. And this is why I said probably should have done this before we cut them into 3 separate blocks. Because now, we need to cut each one separately, and they're not going to quite line up properly, and we will need to do a bit more sanding once we stick some of them together. So you're just going to take each of them, take your knife, and you're just going to cut the tops off of them, so that you've got a nice, even edge. There we go, we now have 3 blocks that are pretty close to identical. There are a few discrepancies in them, but unfortunately that's always going to happen. So we're going to put one of them aside, because these two are going to form the greater summoning core. Okay, so with these bits of foam, they have holes in one side, so we're going to make those the inside. Any imperfections in your foam, try to hide them by sticking them on the faces that no one's going to ever see. So, given that our cuts aren't quite as even as they could be, we're going to get them and line them up as best as we can. Then we're going to take them apart, wasting all of that time lining them up. Then we're going to get the toothpicks that I forgot to have out when I showed you what we were going to need, and we're going to break them in half because they're too long. And then we're going to stick them into these two faces, like so. And I can even use these holes that are already conveniently placed in there for me. Except for that one, it's too close to the edge. And then we're going to bring them in and press them together. So that we now have a nice 60mm by 60mm block of foam. We're then going to bring in our 600 grit sandpaper and set it down on a flat surface. And we're going to use this to make it so that the two bits of foam line up perfectly. And once you've got your edge lined up perfectly, you just need to do that to the other 4 spots where it comes together. And once you have the thickness across there, because it's going to have reduced a bit below 60mm now, you need to take a bit off of each side of this, preferably taking off any markings that are not desirable. Okay, so now they line up really nicely, and I've measured across between this edge here where we've sanded down either side, and it is measuring 54mm. So now we need to take 2mm off of each side to make it so that it's nice and square. Alright, that's pretty good there. It's looking fairly square now, which is exactly as we want. Now these sharp edges, we're going to take them down a little bit, but you don't want to take them too much. So just the ever so slightest bit, just to roll the edge off a tiny little bit. And we don't need to do it on this edge because it's the bottom. And this foam feels really nice now that it's all sanded and nice and even. Now, if you don't get your 2 bits lining up perfectly, it's okay. Just get them as close as you can, because we're going to pull them apart and cut into them, and they're not going to line up perfectly in the end anyway. But get them as close as you can, because it will make your result better. Okay, so now, going across this way, where you don't have a center line, we need to mark a center line. So, we know that this thing is, I think it was 54mm? No, 58mm. So, we're going to cut 58 in half, which gives us 26. Which gives us 29, not 26. I'm bad at maths apparently. And we're going to put some marks in it all the way around 29mm. Don't need that much knife. So 29mm, bam, bam. Then mark that line, and down these faces, we want that mark as well. There we go. Now we have marks all over it. Not that you can see it really well. Now you can see the marks. And you can even see where I stuffed up marking it on top and had to do a second mark. Try to avoid doing that if you can. So now that we've got our marks all over it, we need to cut some trenches into it. Okay, so the first step in carving the trenches into it is, you'll notice on the reference image here that it has a small hole in towards the top of it that goes through from each side and straight down the middle. So we can use the cap off of our glue, which is about 15mm across as our marking. So we're just going to hold it on there, trying to get it as center on the center line as possible, and we're just going to lightly mark around it, getting it in roughly the right height, like so. And then we're going to measure its distance. So that is approximately, so it's about 17mm from the top. And then we repeat that on the other 3 sides. And finally, where your 2 lines cross on top, you want to put one there as well. Okay, so now that we have our 5 circles marked into our greater summoning core, we need to put some trenches in. So this one you can just eyeball. So we want to make it so that from the center line of each trench, it's about the same distance, so I'm going to make it about 2mm from each center line. About that much. And it is probably a good idea to use a ruler here, just so that you get a consistent straight line. Okay, so once you've got your lines marked around each of the sides like this, we're going to want to do the same on the top. So where your side marks come up and in from the sides onto the top, line your ruler up at each end and score across, making sure that you try to avoid cutting through. Actually, no, on the top, that top bit's going to get removed entirely, so you can slice straight through it if you'd like. Okay, so now we want our lines, our trenches that go across and out from each of the centerpieces. So bringing in our ruler just a little bit below the center of this circle and score across. And then we want to go a little bit above the center of the circle and score across as well. And then we rotate it and use the first mark as a reference point for how high we want it, and try to get it about the same height on the other side. Like so. And then you're going to flip it over so that it goes back to the other side that joins onto the first side that you marked out for this bit of the trench. And we're going to mark that so that the back side lines up, so that we don't use a reference point that used a reference point that used a reference point. So they all kind of use the same point of reference so that we get it as consistent as we can. So that you end up with something like this. Okay, so we just have another couple of marks to mark out before we can cut these trenches out. So for these, because we are going at an angle and they're not joining together all the way around, we are going to do some measuring. So I think about 35 mil from the bottom for each of them. So just take a nick out of it, 35 mil up from the bottom on each corner. And then you're going to use that point, then you're going to score a line that comes up from the point that you just nicked into the corner. You can probably see it better on this face. From the corner up into the halfway point between where this line comes into the circle and where this line comes into the circle. So it goes across there. So you just take your ruler, line it up with the nick down there, bring it up approximately, and score your line in. And then you do it with the other mark on that face, and you do it on each of the faces. And you'll end up with something that looks like this. And then you want to mark a little bit of each side of that line, like we have with the previous point, so that we have, well, a thickness for our trench. Awesome, so now we're ready to actually carve our trench, and this is why we just stuck it together with toothpicks without actually gluing it together, because now we can pull it apart, and it'll make getting into these bits easier. It'll make carving some of the trenches a little bit easier. Basically, we're just going to get our knife, and we're going to cut the trench a little bit deeper, and then flick out. Although actually on these ones we can probably make a cut along here. And don't worry if it's not perfect, because it's just to give it a tiny bit of depth. Just get that foam out. Like so. Now, for the really tricky bit is these bits in here. So we'll start with this diagonal one, and we just want to make our score on either side of our initial marking line a little bit deeper. And then we're going to put our knife out, put it into that gap, and we're just going to try to cut out that bit. And go at it from this side. There we go. Like so. And then we're going to do that on the rest of the bits on this face. And now, finally, for the really tricky bit, we need to cut a trench that goes around this circle. So, we're just going to freehand it going around trying to keep it the same sort of distance. And then we just need to pop that bit out the same way we did the rest of it. And it's okay if the bottom of your trench looks a bit because we are going to put a bit of gap filler in there just to smooth it out nicely. Now, you do that on the rest of your marks on your piece of foam. And you'll end up with something like this, which will form one half of your greater summoning core. So, now all you need to do is carve out the other side in the same way. Okay, so I finished carving them out and this one's stuck together and nice and dry now, and I decided I would show you this bit because it is kind of important. Now, as you can see on the standard summoning core, where I have carved out the center bit is really, really rough. So we're going to fill that in with gap filler, as well as where the two bits have come together at the top, along the sides. It doesn't quite line up perfectly, so we do want to just try to hide those gaps a little bit. So we're just going to take our gap filler and we're going to get a brush that the end of it is able to fit into the gaps that are cut down like so. Some of them are a bit narrow, but it should be fine. And then you take the gap filler on the end and you start pressing it in. And the idea is that we just want to fill it in so that it's nice and smooth, and brings it up to the level of the rest of the channels. And then we can just push some gap filler along the channel to make sure that it's nice and smooth in there as well. And once you're done filling it in, you'll have something like this. So now that we've done that on the summoning core, do the exact same thing on the greater summoning core, and it'll look something like this. Now, once the gap filler that's on the surface of it, like on this one, has dried, that one's still a bit wet, so we'll put the other side. We're going to bring our sandpaper back in, and we're just going to sand it back so that it's smooth, so any burrs that are up on this edge from where we were putting the gap filler in are made flat again. Awesome, and it comes up nice and flat. And you just do the exact same thing with the greater summoning core just to get it nice and flat once it's set. Some of these still need to set a bit more. So once we've done that, we can base coat it and it'll be ready for painting. Bam! And I have finished them off. I put a base on them, I painted them up, and I even textured the base. You've seen me do it 1,000 times. Basically, for those of you who haven't, the color scheme that I use is simply Space Wolves Grey, Gehenna's Gold on the edges, and then do some OSL with some Snot Green and some Scorpion Green thinned down with acrylic medium. You can see how I do the OSL up here somewhere. There'll be a link to a video I did on it. And basically, the base, as usual, is just 3mm MDF with an edge beveled off, and then with my grey sand stuck down to it. Make sure that your base is painted like, for mine, it's black, but if you're doing a more earthy kind of base, like maybe some grass, then a nice dark brown would be appropriate. So basically, just the last thing that needs to be done is we get our wood glue and water in our spray bottle, shake it up, make sure that the nozzle's set right, and you just want to soak the whole model down so that, well, it grabs any loose particles as well as sealing it. And you just soak the whole model down to help seal everything in, like so, and then make sure that you rinse out your spray bottle nozzle so that it doesn't get stuck up with PVA. So there you go, that's how you can get the summoning core and greater summoning core from Dawn of War onto your tabletop, and how good do they look? I mean, I'm really happy with the way they came out. Now, if you're going to paint them a more stone sort of blacky color as they appear in the game, then I highly recommend chipping off some of the corners in places so that it sort of looks like it's a rock that's been smashed a bit, just to give it a bit more surface for light to scatter off for your edge highlighting, to give a better rock effect, to be perfectly frank. But if you don't want to go with that, and you just want to paint them up in a similar sort of style to how I've done mine, go right ahead. They look awesome done that way, and it helps to bring them out from the grey table quite a bit. So let us know what you think in the comment section below. Is there anything I could have done better that you would have liked to have seen? Or are you fairly happy with the way that they came out as well? And of course, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up so we know that you like it, so we can keep making stuff that you like. And if you want to improve your wargaming, make your tabletop battles more epic, and give your wargaming budget more power, then make sure you smash the crosshair and ding the bell. You'll subscribe and I'll be able to share with you more battle reports, terrain tutorials, and strategies to make your wargaming experience more epic. And I'll see you next time.